When the Cadillac Voyage was introduced for 1988, it really was trying to set a new direction for Cadillac altogether. The concept that you see here had a significantly curvier body than what Cadillac owners were used to, with a lot of tumble home harkening back to the 1970s era Cadillacs, but also a significant amount of glass, as you can see as we walk around the car here, all about the vehicle, giving it this open and airy feel. And of course, as you also notice, it has skirted wheels front and rear, because at GM Design during the time, if you wanted a forward-looking car, you would skirt the rear wheels, and if you wanted a radical car, you skirt both the front and the rear. By the way, those skirts articulate open when one turns the wheel so that you could actually go around the corner. But notice how much glass there is in this car. The backlight is immense. The door glass is so big it can't go down into the door. And then, of course, you have the roof, which is also glass. This was during a time when General Motors was trying to design these so-called no-line cars with very few, if any, creases, and with kind of the form of the overall car making the statement, and not a lot of ins and outs and creases and feature lines. Such was the desire of then General Motors Vice President of Design Chuck Jordan, who took the throne in 1986 following Irv Ribicki, and Jordan really wanted to set a completely new design direction for General Motors after the typical three-box designs that his predecessor had executed. It was just time for something new and fresh, and the Voyage was supposed to be that for Cadillac. Notice it doesn't even have the vertical lamp signatures that many Cadillacs had up until that point, except the Sevilles. It's almost like a modern fuselage car, similar to what Chrysler was doing during the 1969 to 1973 period, with monocoque styling, not really any distinct forms unto itself, although there is a slight feature line increase there in the front fender. But aside from that, it's pretty much one continuous form all over the vehicle. Now, the Voyage was designed in the advanced studios at General Motors by Jerry Brockstein and his team. It did not come out of the regular Cadillac production studios, and perhaps that's why it looked so radical. But that was really the function of the advanced studios during the time, was to look forward and set a different design direction from what Cadillacs were at the time. And by 1988, they still had that three-box design that had really been so successful for so many years at Cadillac. But time was moving on, and buyers, or at least General Motors thought its buyers, were ready for something new. And the Voyage, or the Voyage, as it was actually spelled with an accent aigu on the final E, was introduced at the auto show circuit in 1988 and was lauded pretty universally by critics as well as the buying public as a design that was highly attractive during the time. And so while the Voyage was introduced for the 1988 model year to the auto show circuit, Cadillac followed up with a sequel to that, the two-door Cadillac Solitaire. Now, by this point, the Solitaire had a similar form language as the Voyage, as we're going to see when we walk around it, but it did have some minor differences, including the egg crate grille up front as opposed to the Voyage's, let's say, more toothy affair, and no pop-up headlamps up front here. They appear to be integrated into these lamps that are set down low on the front of the vehicle. Now, both vehicles had an aerodynamic drag coefficient of 0.28, which really reflected some advanced aerodynamic development. You'll notice that the car has some significant taper in plan view as it goes forward, the low hood as well, coupled with the high butt on this one, or the high trunk, and the lack of mirrors certainly helped the aerodynamic drag coefficient. But beyond aerodynamics, the Solitaire really had a number of great form cues that, unfortunately, Cadillac would never really embrace completely. Little elements would make it through to various vehicles like the mid-90s full-size Fleetwood, as well as the 1992 Seville and STS, but there never was a Cadillac, unfortunately, that really looked like the Solitaire or the Voyage. Let's take a quick trip around the Solitaire, and up front you'll notice that there's really just the one crease in the middle of the hood. The hood, by the way, is a clamshell hood. We'll see in front of it in a moment. But this is one of these no hard line, certainly, cars, and look at that tumble home as well as the taper as you come to the front, again, helping with the aerodynamics. Now, one of the strange things about the Solitaire is that glass section that's incorporated into the door. Remember, we talked about the Voyage having a ton of glass. The Solitaire does as well, but it has this basket handle style B-pillar and really no C-pillar, so to speak of. A rare car with no C-pillar, just a lot of glass back there. So you have the glass for the backlight that wraps around, then you have the glass in the door, you have the glass up front, and you see the significant bright work along the bottom of the car that at least helps to slim the body side in this view. That quarter would otherwise look chunky because it's so high. Notice how tall the deck lid is on this car relative to the hood, and that's for the aerodynamics. Now, you do see a crease that runs around starting from about the door and the cut line all the way around the car that forms the top surface, which is pretty flat aside from that crease in the middle. And again, that gives you this overall look of width. And take a look, by the way, at how wide the car is at the belt line and even below that, the midsection, and how narrow it is at the top. A lot of tumble home on this. You can also see here with the door glass up, I mean, this car must have had great sight lines out of it, and you definitely don't see this today. A lot of people like to sit in a car feeling secure and not that they're exposed. This is the antithesis of that. And look at where the windshield touchdown point is, by the way. There's no dash to axle on this car because the windshield touches down so far forward in the car overall. Let's take one more look around the car and I'll point out some other features. Now, the hood ornament there actually says V12, and the Solitaire was powered by a Lotus-Cadillac combined engineered 6.6-liter V12 that made 430 horsepower. Remember, the GM owned Lotus during this time. This was the time when Chrysler owned Lamborghini, GM had Lotus, and so that was something that benefited, like the Corvette as an example, when they came out with the ZR1 engine, which was actually built by Mercury Marine for Chevrolet. And you can see the V12 logo behind the front wheel, these large wheels. I think they're 20-inch wheels, which doesn't sound all that large today, but was certainly large for the late 1980s when many things were riding on 15-inch wheels. I do love how the deck lid has that rake to it, and the car overall just has this gesture that it's moving forward. It has kind of this wedge-style profile with the front being so low and the deck being so high. Notice the crease, by the way, that runs the full length there from the roof panel down into the windshield, down over top of the deck lid, and then over that surface that completes the deck lid that we're looking at right now. Of course, you have the bright work also is interesting in that it runs the entire length of the car, and you have the quad tip exhausts for the V12 engine under hood. Interestingly, those exhaust tips are divided into 4 sections as opposed to 3. 3 would have made more sense because then 3 times 4 equals 12. And now you have the, 16 slots. Maybe at some point it was thought that this might have a V16 under hood, but Cadillac and Lotus went with a V12, which, by the way, was the lesser priced Cadillac when the V16 was available. And take a look at just how long the front end is and how pointy, again, contributing to that overall aerodynamic drag coefficient. And now let's take a quick look at the interior. This car had a remote keyless entry system. You'll notice the seats resemble those in the 1992 Eldorado a little bit here, but they did have a massaging and heated function to keep you comfortable. Notice the 4 displays up top there, kind of similar to what car companies are doing today with these big wraparound displays. Of course, that technology, the LCD technology, was not something that was around back in the 1980s when this car was being developed. Other than that, this car is pretty simple. I believe those displays up top were for the cameras, for the mirrors, and then to look rearward on the car so that, you don't really have any way to see that otherwise. There's no inside or outside rear view mirror. The steering wheel is very similar, and the steering wheel controls to the Voyage, as is that funky gear shifter. Very typical gauges that I don't think are necessarily functional. I think that this was a concept car, and it was a functional concept car in terms of being able to drive, but I'm not sure that all the features really worked here. Although I do think the cameras did work originally when this car was fabricated. By the way, both the Voyage and Solitaire were fabricated off-site by a third party by the name of Triad. GM contracted them to make these cars, and they were all hand-built, handmade, and wow, just a beautiful job. It's amazing. The car has some elements of it that look a little bit tired when compared with how it looked, new in 1989. But heck, this car is now getting a little dated in terms of, or at least aged, let's just say, being 37 years old. And I think for being 37 years old, it looks pretty fantastic. Overall, I think that it's a pretty handsome car, not quite as good looking as the Voyage, but still a dramatic statement, as I mentioned, that I think it was a real shame that Cadillac never really pioneered this or leaned forward with it. Cadillac had, of course, this that was powered by the V12. They had in the early 2000s the Cadillac 16, but probably because of cost reasons as well as, let's say, GM program planners just really being reticent to commit to volumes on big vehicles, whether they be four-passenger sedans or two-door coupes with V12 or V16 engines. They just never came to fruition and stayed entirely in the concept space. And here, by the way, is a look under hood at that combined Cadillac Lotus-engineered V12 engine that made 430 horsepower. It's pretty clear this was a custom fabricated engine. The valve covers that are underneath the intake look like they're pretty rough cast, not a smooth finish at all on there. And then the car does have custom headers. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear this car run. The Voyage is powered by a standard 4.5-liter Cadillac V8. I think at some point it had a higher horsepower variant of a 4.5-liter V8 and all-wheel drive system, but it's been retrofitted to just be front-wheel drive and to have the conventional V8, probably because that one broke down at some point and they still wanted it to be able to drive. I'm not sure if this car is still a driver or not, because where are you going to get parts for a custom engine like this? Does have a big intake box, that's for sure, and a rather nice logo for the V12. The radiator looks, I would say, relatively thin. I'm not sure that it could adequately cool this big of an engine, and there's not much room for an engine fan to cool anything off. But hey, this was a show car. It wasn't going to be something that was idling in traffic, and you'll notice that the hood has, as I mentioned, that so-called clamshell design where it's reversed hinged, and I guess that allowed for a little bit more serviceability. Even the shock towers on this appear custom fabricated and then welded. So everything on this is custom. The folks at Triad just did a wonderful job. And the paint scheme, this kind of purpley red, I don't know what color you'd call it, but certainly eye-catching. Alas, while Chuck Jordan, when he was at the helm of General Motors, certainly created some interesting concept cars, or oversaw them, I should say. His teams created them. And some of these so-called no-line cars did end up making it through to production. There were a number of them designed under Chuck Jordan's leadership that came out. For instance, the early 1990s Firebird with the 64-degree raked windshield. That would be a great example of a no-line car. You have the 1995 Riviera with its rounded forms as well. And it did have some creases on the front end as well as the back, but still kind of similar in spirit to this type of vehicle. You have the 1995 Oldsmobile Aurora, although the Aurora did have significant bulges around both sets of wheels. Maybe one could say the Lumina APV minivan would be another example of this. The early 1990s Caprice as well. Now, in truth, GM stylists had kind of started moving in this direction with some cars under Chuck Jordan's predecessor, like the Buick Riata, which was not designed when Chuck Jordan was the vice president of design. But that would be another example of one of the no-line cars. So this was really the trend, though, that Chuck Jordan wanted to bring beauty back to design, was how he used to talk about it. Maybe even the mid-90s Pontiac Sunfire. But in any case, there you go. But alas, I think it's just a shame that Cadillac never came out with something like this. I think it even still looks dramatic today, particularly in this time frame where you have everybody driving around in those SUVs that look like pieces of crumpled up paper or origami. This would just really stand out. There's not, to my knowledge, many automakers that are really leaning into the clean, unbroken forms and the lack of creases and the lack of complexity. This car is simple and reduced in so many ways, and so elegant. There's not even any break for the taillights here. It's just integrated into the form along with the glass, the sheet metal and the glass blending seamlessly into one another. Maybe someday we'll see something like this. This was supposed to be the future, but it never came. So what do you think of the Solitaire? Put a comment in the comment section. Should Cadillac have built it? Thanks again for watching.